The clock over the bar didn't tick so much as suffocate. Each minute dragged across the backroom, leaving silence nobody wanted to touch. Harlem was alive outside, horns, heels, a sax trying to sweet-talk the night, but in here the air held its breath. Bumpy Johnson sat at the edge of the table like he'd been placed there, not invited. Coat pressed. Hat low. Hand still. The kind of stillness that made other men start moving just to prove they could. Around him, laughter came too loud, spilling against the walls, the way men laugh when they want the room to believe they're untouchable. Jokes were told twice, then told again, each punchline hitting harder than it deserved. A couple of the younger boys watched Bumpy between sips, hoping for a smile, a nod, anything they could take as permission to breathe. He gave them nothing. Calm was his weapon. Quiet was how he loaded it. A server slid in, careful, and set a glass in front of him. Dark liquor, t't. The rim caught a yellow light, clean as a promise. Someone at the far end lifted his own drink in a lazy salute. Compliments, the man said. Not warm. Not friendly. Polite in the way a blade can be polite. Bumpy didn't look down at the glass right away. He let the moment hang until the noise thinned, until even the loud ones felt it, the pressure of waiting on one man's decision. Then he reached, smooth and unhurried, and wrapped his fingers around the glass. A gift in Harlem was never free, but refusing it was its own kind of surrender. He drank. At first it was normal. Heat, smoothness, the familiar bite that told your body the night was turning. Then, beneath that, something else. A thin, sharp thread that didn't belong. Not the burn of whiskey. More like metal. Like medicine that had learned to dress itself up. Bumpy set the glass down with the same control he'd used to lift it. He swallowed once. Twice. Kept his face blank. The room waited for him to react, and he refused to feed it. The laughter tried to restart, forced and brittle, but it didn't land. Men glanced at one another, eyes flicking like cards being dealt under the table. His throat warmed in a way that traveled wrong, too fast, too deep, toward his chest. For the first time all night, Bumpy's mind moved quicker than his hands. Names arranged themselves. That's smiles that had lasted a second too long. The man who said compliments, like he was offering culture instead of trouble. Bumpy didn't cough. Didn't wipe his mouth. He simply breathed, slow, as if air itself was something he controlled. The insult was in the elegance of it. No gun. No shouting. Just a clean glass placed like a signature. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the room. And that's when the dread turned cold. This wasn't meant to scare him. It was meant to finish him. The room kept talking, but the sound thinned, then vanished, like somebody reached over Harlem and turned the dial to mute. Lips moved. Teeth flashed. Cards slapped felt. But Bumpy Johnson heard only his own blood, heavy and deliberate. He didn't show it. He let the warmth in his throat travel where it wanted, let the strange taste settle like an accusation, and he listened inward. 1 heartbeat. 2, 3. Each count landed clean, a metronome inside his ribs. This wasn't fear. This was math. Somebody was trying to write an ending for him while the night pretended nothing had changed. Poison didn't need chaos. It needed time. On 6, a laugh burst too high, too rehearsed. Bumpy's eyes didn't chase it. He kept them level, calm enough to make the room doubt its own courage. His fingers touched the edge of the glass, just a tap, then he set it down. The sound cut through the backroom. Conversations stumbled, then died. Men who'd been grinning a second ago suddenly found their mouths dry. A chair creaked and nobody wanted to own it. 7, 8. Bumpy leaned a fraction toward the only man in the room he trusted to move without needing an audience. The man was close, quiet, watching Bumpy's face like he was reading weather. Bumpy whispered one name, soft, almost tender, and that name hit harder than a threat. Then the ultimatum, just as quiet. Lock the doors. 9, 10. His man didn't ask why. He stood and walked. Bolts slid. Chains caught. The backroom didn't shrink in size, but it shrank in options. Across the table, a few men lifted their glasses and then thought better of it. One swallowed anyway, trying to prove he wasn't rattled, and the swallow sounded loud in the hush. Bumpy watched them like a judge, letting their nerves confess for them, letting the guilty man sweat first in his own skin. 11. Bumpy rose. Not fast. Not dramatic. Steady, like a man standing up from dinner. The poison could be working, but his body didn't advertise it. No wobble. No reach for the table. He stood straight, chin level, eyes awake. And every loud voice in the room remembered what quiet meant. Quote, bravado evaporated. Smirks fell off faces. The man who'd offered compliments blinked, recalculating. If the calm man isn't panicking, then the danger isn't in the drink. It's in what comes after. A figure near the wall shifted, edging toward the hallway like he could slip out unseen. He took 2 steps before he noticed the shapes by the exits, still as statues, hands low, eyes ready. And when he tried the handle, it didn't give. By morning, the story wasn't a story anymore. It was a warning, passed hand to hand like contraband. A word slipped into barbershops between the scrape of razors. It rode on dice tables, under church whispers, through the back doors of speakeasies where men swore they didn't gossip. Bumpy Johnson got poisoned. Not shot. Not jumped. Poisoned, like he was some soft thing you could handle with gloves. That detail mattered. In Harlem, bullets were honest. Poison was politics. And politics moved faster than blood. If Bumpy could be touched, then Harlem could be rewritten. That was the math men did as they buttoned their coats and stepped into the street like the sidewalks belonged to them. Every little outfit with a corner, and a few hungry boys started looking at their maps differently. Every old boss who'd been quiet for years suddenly remembered he had opinions. It wasn't about whether Bumpy would live. It was about what the attempt meant. A king could be reached. There were 2 futures fighting to be born. In one, Harlem stayed under Bumpy's rules. Cold rules, strict rules, rules that kept the streets from turning into a feeding frenzy. He wasn't gentle, but he was consistent. He didn't need to scream to be obeyed. People could hate him and still sleep at night because the order held. He kept chaos on a leash, and everybody, even his enemies, benefited from that leash not snapping. In the other future, Harlem got carved up by loud men who thought noise was the same as power. Men who loved crowds more than control. Men who needed witnesses for every decision, who would turn every disagreement into a street performance just to prove they weren't weak. Under them, every corner became a contest. Every business became tribute. Every night became a coin flip. And the city wouldn't call it war, just trouble in Harlem, like trouble was something that happened by accident. That second future had a face, even if nobody said his name out loud yet. You could feel him in the way certain men smiled too long when they heard the news. Not relieved. Excited. Like they'd been waiting for a crack in the door. This wasn't a rival who wanted Bumpy gone quietly. This was a man built out of arrogance and appetite. Disrespectful on purpose. Hungry for a public humiliation, not just a victory. He wanted the story of Bumpy's end to be told in laughter, in gossip, in a room full of witnesses who could say, "See? He wasn't a legend. He was just a man who drank the wrong glass." That's what made the poisoning different. It wasn't an attack. It was a message. It said, "I can reach you without raising my voice." And Bumpy understood messages. He didn't spend the day asking, "Who did it?" like a man chasing smoke. He asked something colder. "Who watched?" he said, and smiled. The men who planned it told themselves it was clean. No gunfire to wake up the block. No bodies on sidewalks. No cops tripping over shell casings. Just a glass, a swallow, and Harlem waking up to a new order like it was always meant to be. They thought that was power. They thought quiet meant control. But what they didn't understand was the difference between silence and shame. Harlem could forgive a failed hit, sometimes. A shot was honest, even when it missed. A blade in the dark was crude, but at least it spoke the language of the street. Poison was different. Poison was somebody trying to erase you with manners. Somebody pretending they were above you while they dug your grave. And still, if they'd stopped there, if they'd let the room forget and let Bumpy fade out like a rumor, maybe the attempt would have stayed an attempt. They couldn't stop. Because the kind of man who reaches for poison doesn't just want you gone. He wants you small first. It came out in a laugh that lingered after it should have died. It came out in a remark tossed casually, like it wasn't meant for Bumpy to catch, only for everyone else to hear. "Must be getting soft," a voice said, sweet with arrogance. Back in the day, he'd taste trouble before it touched his tongue. A couple men chuckled. Not because it was funny, but because they didn't know where to put their fear. Laughter is a hiding place. The enemy counted on that. The enemy wanted witnesses. Wanted Bumpy's people to carry the humiliation home, to repeat it until it became truth. Bumpy didn't blink. He didn't argue. He let the insult sit there, naked, so everyone could see what it was. A deliberate public bruise. That was the mistake. In Harlem, you could take a shot at a man and still settle it later, if you had the nerve and the money and the sense to keep it between grown folks. But if you tried to embarrass him in front of his own people, you weren't trying to win. You were trying to strip him. You were telling the room he didn't deserve to be feared. You were asking the street to test him. And a calm man doesn't panic when you test him. He watches who enjoys the test. Bumpy's eyes moved, slow and surgical. Not searching for the loudest mouth, searching for the ones who repeated it with their faces. Who leaned in. Who smirked like they'd already picked a side. He let them think the poison was making him quiet. He let them mistake restraint for weakness, because weak men always make that mistake. They see calm and assume empty. Across the room, the bartender avoided Bumpy's gaze a second too long, hands busy with nothing. A messenger boy, one of those skinny kids who carried words like they were packages, hovered near the door like he'd been told to wait for a signal. And tucked behind the confidence, behind the performed laughter, was the supplier's shadow, whoever had brought that gift in the first place. Liquor didn't poison itself. Somebody had to touch it. Somebody had to know what it was. Somebody had to get paid. Bumpy's trusted man returned from the locks, face hard, shoulders set. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten the room. He simply spoke, quiet enough to force everyone to listen the way you listen to a verdict. "Bartender," he said, and the word landed like a chain dropped on concrete. Then, softer, like he was talking to himself. "Messenger." His eyes lifted to the men who'd been laughing. "Supplier." He held the room in that silence, active, heavy, absolute, until even the arrogant understood they'd pushed too far. The clean move wasn't clean anymore. The humiliation had left fingerprints everywhere. Bumpy's mouth didn't twist into a smile. It stayed calm. Because he'd already decided how this was going to go. He was going to pull the chain backward. One link at a time. Rage would have been easy. Rage would have been expected. It would have made the room comfortable, because if Bumpy Johnson shouted, then he was just another man losing control. Another heartbeat with a temper. But Bumpy didn't give them that relief. Inside him, there was no firestorm. There was a ledger. The warmth in his throat, the subtle wrongness in his chest, the way the room had tried to turn his life into a punchline, he filed it all away like evidence. He didn't need anger to move. He needed clarity. Survival wasn't the trick. Any stubborn man could survive a bad night if luck leaned his way. The trick was what came after. If you lived through poison and did nothing, then poison became a new language in Harlem. It became a tool any arrogant fool could reach for when he didn't want to risk a gun. That couldn't happen. Not to Bumpy. Not to his people. Not to the order he'd built with quiet hands and hard choices. He understood something the loud men never learned. Power isn't proven in the moment of attack. Power is proven in the aftermath, when everyone is watching to see if the king bleeds the same as the rest of them. Harlem didn't need a spectacle. Harlem needed a certainty. A lesson so sharp nobody would dare repeat the question. So Bumpy made his moral lines clean. Loyalty wasn't a feeling. It was a contract. You honored it and you got protected, fed, elevated. You broke it and you didn't just get punished, you got studied. Betrayal, to him, wasn't personal. It was educational. It showed you where the rot lived, who could be bought, who could be frightened, who could be tempted by applause. And consequences, real consequences, had to be precise. Not sloppy. Not emotional. If a man vanished and nobody understood why, fear would scatter in every direction and land on the wrong people. But if the consequence matched the crime so perfectly it felt inevitable, then the street would memorize it. Like a rule. Like gravity, Bumpy's breathing stayed even. His face stayed blank. He let the poison do what it was going to do while his mind did what it always did, measured, ruthless, patient. He watched the bartender's trembling hands. He watched the messenger's darting eyes. He watched the smiles that had come too quick, the laughs that had lasted too long. He didn't need to ask who hated him. He needed to know who thought he was finished. Because that was the danger, not hatred but disrespect. Disrespect was contagious. Disrespect was how empires collapsed. And Bumpy didn't build Harlem's balance with noise. He built it with inevitability. He wasn't going to rush revenge and give them the comfort of speed. Speed was for men who were scared the story would change if they waited. Bumpy wasn't scared. He was designing an ending. Not a tantrum. Not a headline. Something colder than both. A schedule. Bumpy didn't call it revenge. Revenge was loud, pistols, panic, pride leaking into the gutter. What he built was quieter, an arrangement. A trap a man could walk into smiling. He sat with the poison still riding his body, and he laid the board out in his head. Harlem was full of men who could pull a trigger. Step 1. Isolate the supply line. Poison doesn't appear in a glass by magic. It travels, ordered, mixed, carried, handed off with a nod and a folded bill. Bumpy's first move wasn't to chase a face. It was to choke the path. By noon, deliveries started moving wrong. A case arrived late. A runner got stopped by a man who didn't ask questions, only took the package and let the boy go shaking. One contact found his usual door locked for repairs. Step 2. Turn a minor player. Big men don't pour poison. Big men hide behind smaller men who dream of becoming big. Bartenders. Messengers. Cousins who know a guy. Cheap hands, hungry hearts. Bumpy chose the weakest link on purpose, not to break him, to bend him. He brought the messenger in first. Not in public. Not with fists. In a back room with one chair and one exit and a man who looked like he could erase that exit forever. Bumpy didn't threaten the boy's life. He offered something more confusing. Protection. A future. Then fear, placed gently on top like a hand on a shoulder. He told the boy the truth. Stay loyal to the wrong people and you die. Switch to the right one and you live. Harlem didn't grade intentions. Harlem graded outcomes. The boy cracked the way most boys crack. Quiet, ashamed, relieved. Names came out. Sprouts. A supplier's nickname. A spot where men met to feel important. Step 3. Feed the enemy safety. Bumpy understood arrogance. Arrogant men get careless when they believe they've done something clever. So he let them taste a small victory. He let a rumor breathe that Bumpy was sick. That he'd gone dark. That his people were nervous, drifting, waiting for orders that weren't coming. He allowed the laughter to survive, on purpose. A few corners got bold. A few mouths said Bumpy's name with less respect, testing the air. Bumpy let them. He needed the enemy to believe the glass had done its job, even if it hadn't finished him. He needed them to stop guarding their own mouth. Because safety makes men sloppy. Step 4. Force a public exposure. Bumpy wasn't going to drag the enemy into a basement and call it justice. Private was where cowards hid. The enemy had tried to disgrace him in front of witnesses, so Bumpy wanted witnesses too, but on his terms. He chose a place where Harlem gathered without thinking. A nightclub that didn't belong to him, a room full of music and money and eyes. A place where a man could show up acting like a predator, because predators love being seen. Bumpy arranged the bait like a game the enemy couldn't resist. Through the turned boy, carefully dressed as gossip, word slipped out about a new shipment. Big money. Easy money. A chance to step into the space Bumpy supposedly left behind. No war. Just a clean grab. Then Bumpy tightened the timing. 1 place. 1 hour. He made sure the exits were owned before the first drink was poured. He made sure the staff knew who to look at and when to look away. He made sure the police stayed busy somewhere else, chasing a noise he'd paid to create. And he made sure the enemy heard exactly what they wanted to hear. Bumpy wasn't coming. That was the hook. That was the lie. Because Bumpy didn't want them cautious. He wanted them hungry. He wanted them walking through that door believing they were the man in charge, believing they'd won small. so they'd step straight into the real loss. As night settled over Harlem like a coat, Bumpy set the final condition, calm as a judge. "He's got a show," he said. "Not a question. A requirement. One place. One time. The enemy arriving convinced they're the predator. And Bumpy waiting." The poison didn't just try to kill Bumpy Johnson. It tried to teach him something. It said, "You're not safe in your own room." It said, "We can reach you without a bullet, without a war, without even raising our voice." And underneath all that, it was a warning that the next move wouldn't be a test. It would be a finish. Bumpy felt it in the way people started talking careful. In the way loyalty turned into performance. In the way men who used to look him in the eyes suddenly found reasons to stare at the floor. Harlem was a kingdom held together by fear and respect, and poison attacked both at once. So Bumpy gave himself a timeline. 72 hours. Not because he liked drama. Because hesitation created space, and space was where enemies lived. Day 1 ended with a small win that looked like control. He found the line where the poison entered the room. The bartender didn't last long in silence. Bumpy didn't need to raise a hand. He just let the man sit with the weight of what he'd done until his lungs couldn't hold the lie. A name fell out. Then another. Then a location, an after-hours spot where a supplier liked to feel important. By nightfall, the supplier's route was cut. The packages stopped moving. Boys who usually ran errands suddenly had empty hands and nervous eyes. Harlem noticed. The street always noticed. It looked like Bumpy had closed the door. But behind that, the bigger threat was already stretching. Because closing one route only proved there were other routes. Day 2 ended with a win that felt like loyalty. Bumpy turned a minor player, one of those men who'd always been close enough to overhear power, but never close enough to touch it. Bumpy gave him protection with one hand and fear with the other, making the choice simple. The man didn't flip because he loved Bumpy. He flipped because Bumpy made betrayal look like a short road to the grave. Information started arriving like payments. Signals. Who had been smiling? Who had been too calm during the poison? Who had been trying to see if Bumpy would stumble? Bumpy rewarded that loyalty immediately. Not with speeches. With action. He elevated the man in front of others, making the lesson visible: loyalty isn't a prayer. It's a profit. It looked like the organization tightened. But the bigger threat hid in the same place it always hid. In the men who watched and learned. Because if someone could poison Bumpy, they could poison anyone close to him. They could turn his people into his weakness, one gift at a time. Day 3 ended with a win that tasted like safety. Bumpy fed the enemy a lie and watched them swallow it. He let rumors travel that he was still recovering, that he was staying behind closed doors, that Harlem was restless. He let the loud mouths get louder, because loud mouths always betray their masters. Somewhere, someone got confident. And confidence makes men reach. That night, Bumpy's trap was nearly assembled. The nightclub. The hour. The exits owned before the first note hit the air. His people posted without looking posted. His instructions delivered in whispers, like prayers that could break bones. 72 hours of pressure, and Bumpy never moved fast. He moved inevitable. But urgency doesn't care how smart you are. It only cares how late you are. Because while Bumpy was building his schedule, the enemy was building theirs. And on the final night, when Harlem was dressed up and glowing, when the city felt like it was holding its breath for whatever story came next, one of Bumpy's most trusted men didn't show. No message. No excuse. Just absence. Right when Bumpy needed him most. Midnight didn't arrive like a moment. It arrived like a verdict. The club was packed the way Harlem packed a room when something was about to change. People laughed, but their eyes kept sliding to the edges, to the quiet men posted like punctuation. Nobody announced Bumpy Johnson. His calm sat in the room and made the music feel cautious. The loud enemy came in late on purpose, smiling like the night owed him interest. He shook hands he didn't respect. He let his laugh roll too far, daring the room to admire him. He expected a victory lap, Bumpy missing, the crowd drifting, the story already written. He didn't notice the doors until they closed behind him. Not slammed. Just shut, soft and final, like someone had decided the chapter wasn't done. Bumpy waited until the enemy reached the bar and ordered a drink like a king. Then Bumpy stepped into view. No rush. No drama. The same stillness that made other men fidget. The enemy's smile tightened. He kept it anyway. "You enjoying yourself?" Bumpy asked, quiet enough to make him lean in. "Thought I'd come celebrate," the enemy said, loud for witnesses. "Celebrate what?" "New times," the enemy said. "Folks been talking." Bumpy let silence work. "Talking about what happened to me. People say a lot." A tray appeared beside the bar. On it sat a glass, dark liquor, neat, polished like a gift. The enemy saw it and went still. Bumpy didn't touch the glass yet. "You wanted me weak," he said. "You wanted my people laughing." "I don't know what you mean," the enemy said, but his voice had lost its shine. Bumpy nodded once, like a teacher hearing the first lie. "Harlem can stomach a shot," he said. "But humiliation? That's a signature." The enemy's voice rose. "You accusing me in front of everybody?" Bumpy's calm didn't move. "I'm giving you what you wanted," he said. "A room full of witnesses." He turned slightly. Y'all saw the smiles. No one spoke. Silence was the answer. Bumpy faced the enemy again. "Say it," he whispered. "Say what?" The enemy tried to laugh, but it broke. "What you did," Bumpy said. "And what you called it." The enemy looked for exits and found eyes. Looked for allies and found distance. His arrogance started shrinking under the lights. "All right," he said, voice thin. "I wanted you out. I wanted people to see you ain't untouchable." "And the poison?" Bumpy asked. The enemy hesitated too long. "Yeah," he said. "It was mine." Bumpy lifted the glass from the tray and held it up, not offering, displaying. "This is what you chose," he said. "Coward work dressed up in silk." He said it in front of the enemy. "Drink." The enemy's mouth opened, and nothing came out. Bumpy's tone stayed almost kind. "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to stand here and feel it, everybody watching, waiting for you to prove you're brave." The enemy's hand hovered over the rim, shaking. Pride pulled. Fear pulled harder. He slapped the glass away. It shattered bright on the floor. The music stumbled, then died. That was the humiliation Bumpy wanted. The enemy breaking himself in public. Bumpy's men moved, hands on shoulder and wrist, no spectacle. The enemy was forced down to his knees, not because Bumpy needed blood, but because Harlem needed a picture. Bumpy leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You wanted a story," he said. "Now you're in one." A single strike landed, precise, symbolic, enough to fold him without painting the room red. Pain flashed, but shame lasted. Bumpy straightened and turned away like the man was already finished. Then he faced Harlem. He didn't raise his voice. Calm carried farther than shouting. "From tonight on," Bumpy said, "anybody who comes at a man in the dark, poison whispers, sneaking, don't get to hide behind one hand." He paused. "I punish the whole chain." His eyes swept the crowd, slow and unreadable. "And if you smiled while it happened," he added softly, "you just told me where to start." The silence that followed wasn't fear anymore. It was a new rule taking root, in Harlem, for everybody listening. After that night, Harlem didn't tell it like a report. Harlem told it like a warning. It started small, the way all real myths start. Two men talking low outside a barbershop, a hand raised mid-sentence like the words themselves were dangerous. Then it spread. A story you didn't laugh at. A story you repeated with your voice lowered, even if you were alone. They said midnight wasn't just a time anymore. Midnight was a line. A line you didn't cross unless you were ready to be erased. Because what happened to Bumpy Johnson didn't live in the glass. It lived in what came after the glass. How the room flipped, how the crowd changed sides without anyone needing to announce it, how the loud man's confidence broke in public like cheap ice. The lesson wasn't that poison failed. The lesson was that poison worked, just not the way the enemy planned. It worked like a spotlight. It showed everybody what kind of men were walking around Harlem pretending they had class. It showed who thought sophistication meant cowardice with good manners. It showed who believed power was something you could steal quietly, then parade loudly. And it showed what Bumpy believed, down in the bones where a man's real rules live. Loyalty buys safety. Not comfort. Not softness. Safety. A room to breathe in. A street that doesn't chew you up for fun. If you stood with him, you stood under a roof he was willing to bleed for. Harlem could be cold, but with Bumpy, it was consistent. That consistency was a kind of mercy the loud men didn't even understand. Disrespect buys destruction. Not because Bumpy was thin-skinned. Because disrespect was contagious. One joke at the right time could become 10 jokes, then a rumor, then a challenge. And challenges in Harlem didn't stay in the mouth. They traveled to hands. They traveled to streets. They traveled to bodies. So Bumpy treated disrespect like a disease, cut it out early, clean, and without drama. And clean attacks? Those invited, dirty endings. That part got repeated most. The part men pretended didn't scare them until they walked home and checked their own shadows. Poison had been meant to remove Bumpy without blood, without chaos, without the kind of violence that turned the city's eyes toward Harlem. Bumpy answered with something worse than violence. He answered with inevitability. He didn't just punish a man. He punished a method. He punished the idea that you could be clever and safe at the same time. He made an example so sharp that every wannabe strategist in the borough started thinking twice before they reached for a quiet trick. You could try to kill him, but you could not embarrass him. Years later, men still measured their courage against that night. Some tried to talk big about it like it was old history, like the street had moved on. But the street never really moved on from Bumpy. It just grew around him, the way a city grows around an old stone building that refuses to fall. In the 1920s, he was a young man learning Harlem's rhythms, learning that noise gets you seen, but calm gets you paid. Back then, his name traveled in smaller circles, through backrooms and side streets, through the spaces where ambition collected. People remembered his eyes before they remembered his face. The way he listened like he was counting everybody's pulse. By the 1930s and 40s, the city had changed and so had the games. Harlem dressed itself up, then got stripped down, then dressed itself up again. Gangs rose, bosses fell, laws shifted, and men kept trying to act like the next loud voice would be the one that mattered. Bumpy stayed what he always was, controlled, deliberate, unfazed by the theater. That poisoning became one of those stories that followed him through every decade like a shadow that worked for him. It hardened his reputation in a way no gunfight could. Anyone could be reckless. Anyone could be loud. But the man who got poisoned and didn't collapse, didn't scramble, didn't beg for sympathy, he became something else in the minds of men who made their living on fear. Calm but deadly. Not loud but fragile. The loud men always gave themselves away. They needed applause. They needed the street to notice them. They needed their enemies to know they were dangerous. Their power lived in performance, so it died the moment the crowd stopped clapping. Bumpy didn't need any of that. His power lived in the rules people followed even when he wasn't in the room. It lived in the way silence could clear a table faster than a pistol. It lived in how he could take an insult, hold it, and turn it into a lesson that lasted longer than a life sentence. By the time the 1960s rolled in, new faces, new money, new kinds of noise, Bumpy wasn't just a man anymore. He was a fixed point. A presence. Harlem's own kind of gravity. Younger crews didn't just fear him, they studied him. They tried to imitate the calm and ended up only looking tired. Because calm without control is just pretending. Harlem was satisfied by what happened that night. The wrong man had been broken in the right way. The room had been put back in order. The story had landed where it was supposed to land. And still, it left an unease behind, like a door that never fully closes. Because the poison proved something that couldn't be unproven. Bumpy Johnson could be attacked. Harlem survived the poison. But the city learned something worse. He could not be moved.